Good evening, and welcome once again to the Gospel Light Radio Show. I had intended this evening to go back to my regularly scheduled sermon series and dealing with millennials and reaching out to them and helping them to be more connected to the mission of the church. And unfortunately, there were certain events that have happened in the last month. Last month, I dealt with this similar topic in terms of helping everybody to be alert but not anxious about this pandemic. At that time, it was just getting started, and people were trying to decide what to do about the situation. Um, and now, as the weeks have progressed, we've seen that many congregations have decided to uh, tell their members to not come to the building to congregate at the building, um, and because local ordinances have made it clear that that is not something that should be happening right now, because it is dangerous for us to gather together in large groups that will help the virus to spread and cause infection and cause people to be unnecessarily exposed and unnecessarily injured uh, by this pandemic. And of course, there are certain people in the brotherhood and in the Christian world as a whole who have taken this as some kind of challenge, who have decided to continue to tell their members uh, to come to worship at the building, um, as some sort of proof of their faith and their dedication to to the Lord. Um, and and unfortunately, it is clear that this has had very dire consequences. Um, there have been dozens of articles printed in the last couple of weeks about preachers who have encouraged their congregations to come and to meet at the building, and subsequently, those preachers have caught the virus and have died from it. And not only have they caught the virus and died from it, but many people in their congregations have caught it and died from it, and countless other people that those people have exposed to this virus uh, are catching the virus and dying from it. And it's just not it's obviously not a wise thing that is happening. And the question, of course, is, does that matter? Is it necessary, based on what the Bible teaches, for us to gather in a large group? And no matter what's going on, no matter what the risks are, no matter what the challenges are, no matter what the situation is it necessary for Christians to meet as a large group, or is it admissible for Christians, when situations cause the church to be scattered, cause the church to uh, not be able to follow their regularly scheduled routine, uh, are we somehow banned from worshiping the Lord in those situations? The assertion that's being made uh, by these preachers who are I guess, well-meaning. These are guys, some of them are guys that I've known for a while who I had a lot of respect for. Others are, relative neophytes. Um, that I don't know much about, but they are, let's say, prolific in their writings and their videos and their presentations about how it is imperative that on the first day of the week, the whole church must be gathered together in one place in order for worship to be valid. That if the whole church does not gather together in the same place, then somehow that makes the worship, and specifically the partaking of the Lord's Supper, not something that is able to be done. That we have to basically scrap our plans of worshiping God. We can't do anything pleasing to God if the worship service does not take place at the same time and at the same in the same location that it normally happens. And just off the bat, there's a lot of things that seem off about that argument. So where is this argument coming from? Where are we getting this argumentation that the whole church must be gathered together in one place in order for worship to be valid? So obviously the verses that are being quoted are Acts 20 verse 7, 1 Corinthians 11, 1 Corinthians 14, and Hebrews 10, 25. And if you take those verses, Acts 20 verse 7 obviously is one that we go to a lot to show that worship on the first day of the week was a practice that happened in the first century. We understand that there is a shift in the focus from the Sabbath day to the first day of the week, and Acts 20 verse 7 is a good exemplar showing the disciples meeting on the first day of the week and the activities that we would associate with worship in the worship service are taking place on the first day of the week as opposed to the Sabbath. But nowhere in Acts 20 verse 7 does it say that every Christian in the city of Jerusalem was gathered at that house. First Corinthians 11 verses, I guess they would probably start at verse 23 through the end of the chapter. It talks about the manner in which we take the communion when we gather together. And we understand that when we gather together to take communion, that is a serious time. It's not a casual thing. It's not something that, people can come and go and take their plate and do. We're all coming together for a purpose, and we want to make sure that we are mindful of that purpose. But again, nowhere in this verse says that the whole church, that is every member of a given congregation, needs to be there in order for the supper to be valid or the supper to have meaning. The people that are there together should eat the supper together. When you come together, you wait for one another. If anyone is hungry, let him eat at home. This is not a meal to satisfy hunger. We're eating together for the purpose of commemorating the death and burial and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. And everybody who is there, who is in the room, should be aware of that and sensitive to that and mindful of that. But there's nothing in this text that says that if a person is absent or a person doesn't make it, or a certain percentage of the congregation doesn't make it to the worship service, then we just have to cancel worship for that day. In fact, the only place where this whole that language the whole church uh, coming together is even used is the 1 Corinthians 14 reference. And it says in verse 23, therefore, if the whole church assembles together and all speak in tongues, and ungifted or unbelievers enter, will they not say that you are mad? But again, here it's not saying that this is some kind of requirement for worship. It says if the whole church were assembled together and everyone spoke in tongues, that would be a problem. This is not a verse that is talking about this is a solution. This is a problem. If everybody's coming together and everybody's speaking in tongues at the same time, then we have a problem. Things have to be done decently in order when we come together, and that is the thrust of this this passage. It's talking about order when we get together. When we get together as a group, there should be order. There should be a flow to the activities. It should be done in a manner that is respectable to the occasion, that can be followed even by an outsider who's coming in, who they will understand what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. But again, there's no requirement that all the people have to be there, or a certain number of people have to be there in order for worship it to work. And so, I mean, we're talking about a situation here where people are not able to gather for some kind of environmental reason, and I know that, and I'm sensitive to the fact that this is a viral pandemic. This is not a physical barrier such as a fire that burns down the building, or a snowstorm that closes down roads or whatever. Those things are things that happen and things that we as congregations have dealt with in the past. And this is something new. We aren't technically prevented from getting to the building. We could all get to the building if we wanted to. But there is inherent danger in us all gathering at the building. And that inherent danger is concerning enough to the elders of many congregations that they are, not only just to the elders of many congregations, but to public safety and public health officials, that if even if your elders don't see the danger, public health officials are saying that there is a danger here. The doctors, the people that understand diseases and how they work, are saying that there's significant danger here. And I understand that there is some skepticism in religious circles in general, and specifically in certain populations about these types of experts, and I share that skepticism. The numbers, the death toll in America, the last time I checked, is somewhere around 26,000 people have died, which is a terrible, horrible number, but it's not the number that they were originally predicting. And when we see those projections fall short, some of us who are looking at this as a theoretical exercise have the temptation to toss the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, the numbers aren't getting to the level that they said they were going to, so obviously this is not a problem, or at least not the problem that they were saying it would be. And I understand that temptation, and I agree with that to some extent. At the same time, we're still in the beginning stages of this pandemic based on the information that we have. And not to get too far into the weeds here, because I want to get back to the argumentation, but just as a way of education, the numbers that we have, the people that are infected, the people who are dying, those are the reality that's what is known right now. What we don't know is the number of people who are infected that are not showing symptoms. We don't know the number of people who are able to transmit the disease, even though they're not actually being affected by the disease in a physical way. And where we are, the count that we have is based on people who have symptoms, and this is a disease that has at least a 2-week incubation period, which means the number that we know about is at least 2 weeks behind what the true number is. And that true number could be exponentially higher than the number that we know now. So this is not a internet hoax. This is not a puffed up media-driven story. This is something that is actually happening and is actually affecting a lot of people. And just because you in your community may not have very many people who are affected, and you may not know anybody who's affected, I can guarantee you that there are people who do. At my congregation, we have two of our elders are medical professionals. They are seeing this. They are working with this up close and personally. They know what is going on. Brother Tim Bench, who's a co-host on this show, works at one of the hospitals down here, and he sees this. He's seen people who are sick from it. One of our close friends in our Facebook group has a couple of relatives who are suffering mightily from this disease. So this is a real thing, and for preachers to be so cavalier about saying, well, we have to get together and we have to meet regardless of whether or not there's danger, because we all got to go sometime. And you might think that's crazy. No one would actually say that. Oh, yes, they would. They would absolutely say that. They actually have. And on live TV. So it becomes necessary for us to really dig into this idea of, are we doing something wrong by telling people it's okay to not meet at the building and we can still worship God in spirit and in truth where we are? So let's take it, because the pandemic, this disease is something that's invisible, and people are going to get hung up on potential threats as being something that's not worth considering, even though, again, in this case, a potential threat is definitely something that's worth considering, because if we're going to say, if we go back to the original argument, that the original assertion is that the whole church has to be in one place in order for worship to be valid, even though the Bible doesn't actually say that. There's no no verse, no language that forces us to draw that conclusion. And they don't even actually believe that because, okay, if you say the whole church has to be together in order for us to take communion, what if one person is sick and they don't feel well? Well, that person can stay home. Okay, then you've sold the store there. Not the whole church doesn't have to be there in order for worship to be valid. We've established that one person can be out sick, and worship can go on, and it's fine. What if 10 people are out sick? Same difference, right? What if 100 people are out sick? The number doesn't seem to matter. So this whole argument that the whole church has to be together in order for worship to be valid goes out the window. If one person is sick, then that person doesn't have to show up. But and so then the argument is, well, those people aren't actually sick. They're just afraid of getting sick. It's not that they're afraid of getting sick. It's the fact that if a person is sick, what if a person is contagious? That person shouldn't be around other people and getting them sick either. And again, we're dealing with a 2-week incubation period where a person is contagious. This is not like the flu, where the flu is, you're basically only contagious when you're showing symptoms with the flu. This is different. You are contagious 2 weeks, maybe even some experts think it may be even as long as 3 weeks before you even begin to show physical symptoms. So you could be sick and going to worship at least 3 weeks before anybody knows or understands that you are sick, or even before you know and understand that you're sick. And I don't know about you, but that's not a risk I'm willing to take, because I have love for, like I said, I'm a reasonably healthy young guy with no underlying health conditions. The chances of me having problems, even if I did contract this disease, are fairly small. If it was just me and just my life that I was concerned about, not a problem. But it's not just me. I have a wife who has multiple underlying conditions that cause this disease to be more dangerous for her. I have a congregation that I attend on a normal basis that has many, many elderly people who have multiple underlying conditions that would cause this disease to be very, very deadly to them. Yeah, for my age and demographics and things like that, maybe the chances of me dying are less than 1%, less than half of 1%. But for them, it's going to be some estimates, some of the numbers that I've seen are closer to 15, 20%, 1 out of 5. If 1 out of 5 of the elderly people at our congregation contracted this disease and died from it, that would be a lot of funerals. I'm not willing to take their lives into my hands and tell them that they need to take their lives into their hands in order to do that. And again, this has nothing to do with the government taking away your right to worship. You have every right to worship. The question is it wise and is it necessary? But again, this is a threat that is invisible, and people have a hard time conceptualizing invisible threats. So let's take it away from something that's invisible and put it into just the underlying question of, is it okay for us to have alternate meeting places in the case of something happening that compromises our ability to get to the building in some way. When we pose this question to one of these preachers, and the answers that we got back were somewhat baffling. We said if there was a snowstorm, let's say, that cut off a small town. The small town has a congregation of 100 people, and in the middle of the town, it's a bridge. Snowstorm cuts off the bridge. 25% of the people the 25 people that live on the same side of the bridge as the building, they can get to the building no problem. The other 75 are on the other side of the bridge. They can't get to the building. Can the 25 that live on the side of the building, they can get to the building, can they have worship even though the 75 can't get across the bridge? And of course the answer is yes. They could have worship, they can get to the building, they can do whatever all the things that they need to do. It's fine. But for some reason, the 75 on the other side of the bridge, they can't have worship. They're done. They're stuck. What if the 75 on the other side of the bridge can all get to one brother's house? So let's say brother so-and-so on the other side of the bridge has a fairly large house. A good number of those 75 can get to brother so-and-so's house. Can they have worship at brother so-and-so's house? Now, in my mind and in the minds of most of us, I think we would say, yeah. I mean, they're all there. They're gathered together. They have the willingness to worship God. They're gathered together for the purpose of worshiping God. As long as they have some grape juice and crackers and unleavened bread there, or the ability to procure those things, what would stop them from having worship? But because we understand that the building is not the church. The church is the gathering of Christians for the purpose of worshiping God. But he insists that no, the whole church has to be able to get together in order for worship to happen. But again, he already gave that point up. Because, again, if we're talking about the whole church, well, there's only one church, so the whole church has to be in a certain location. That means that, last count that I saw, there's 1.5 million members of the Church of Christ in the United States. Do all 1.5 million of us have to be in one location in order for? Well, obviously that's not true. We're talking about one congregation. Well, okay, one congregation in what defines a congregation? How do we put together a congregation? Where is the rule that says that the congregation is an entity that once you form it, it can't be manipulated or broken up or subdivided in any way. There's nothing like that in Scripture. And if you really want to get down to the congregation, what congregation just means an assembly, a group of people that have gotten together. So, in technical terms, if you want to be, pay attention to what the words actually mean. The congregation that meets at the building And the congregation that meets at Brother So-and-so's house are congregations that can worship. There's no problem there. Now this brother went on to say that, well, the elders, if they want to, of the congregation, the whole congregation, can designate a second service at Brother So-and-so's place. But it has to be at a different time than the original service so that their opportunity exists for both services to exist, even though logistically it's impossible for both services to contain the same people. I'm going to let that argument kind of sink in for a second. Obviously, there's nothing in Scripture that talks about the time of worship service and why that would matter in this case. And again, you see how that argument gives away the store. If the elders can designate a secondary location, they can designate a tertiary location, a quaternary location. They can designate 30 locations if they want to. So even though you said that the entire congregation has to be in the same location in order for worship to be valid, you just then go back and declare that the elders have the ability to designate other locations and as they see fit. So that's fine. Then we have the authority, therefore, to have multiple locations where people can worship. If not, why not? And so we point to scriptures like Matthew 18:20, and that where two or three are gathered in Jesus' name, then there he is in the midst. And of course, the argumentation against that is, well, that verse is not talking about worship per se, and that's true. The context of that passage is not the context of worship. But then that begs the question: if two or three being gathered does not mean that does not have anything to do with worship, if that doesn't have anything to worship, then what is the minimum number of people that can be together in order to constitute a valid worship service? Is it, if it's not two or three, is it 5, 10, 15? Like where in Scripture would you go to establish that? It's not there. And so to make a blanket proclamation that having two or three people gather together at a house somehow invalidates their worship without some kind of guidance as to why or how or what number they would need to reach in order to have valid worship. It strains credibility. And so and then they try to deflect by saying that, it sounds like you're just trying to, from our side, it sounds like you're just trying to pull the worship service back to this building, that like as if you're identifying the church as the church building as the church. And of course, they argue, well, we understand that the church building is not the church, because the church can meet anywhere. Um, but yet, your argumentation is very building centered. Because again, if we go back to the snowstorm example, you're saying that the 25 people that can get to the building are somehow the church and have valid worship, but the 75 who meet at a different location um, can't have valid worship. What makes the 25 at the building okay to worship, and but the 75 not at the building not okay in that situation? Why isn't the other way around if the building is not the church? And you say that you understand that the building is not a church, not the church. But yet your argumentation is that if they can make it to the building and the building is available, then that's valid worship. But if they can't, then somehow it's not. So these arguments are on their face. Uh, I mean, I guess they're convincing enough to enough people, because there are, again, people preaching these things from the pulpits, and people uh, going out of their way to attend services at congregations in defiance of health ordinances. Um, but again, I'm digging into them just a little bit, and I'm not seeing the compelling reasoning here that's telling us that worship is only valid in a certain location and or with a certain number of people. Um, I'm not seeing it. And then we go back to a couple of things that I brought up last time that I spoke on this topic. Um, and I really kind of want to hit them again in order to try to get us to understand the point. First is Luke chapter 4. And we know this story, but I think we're missing something here. That the devil comes to Jesus and tells him, you know, if you are the Son of God, he leads him up to stand on the pinnacle, starting at verse 9 of the temple. It says to him, if you're the Son of God, throw himself down from here, because it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. He appeals to God's promises of divine protection, saying that, God promises to protect you. So just go out and do something reckless. Throw yourself off the temple. And what is Jesus' reply? Absolutely. I'm just going to go out and I'm going to show you that God is going to protect me. And I'm going to throw myself into a dangerous situation. No, that's not how he responds. Jesus answers and says to him, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. And that's what these brothers are doing. They're putting God to the test by saying, just come out and keep worshiping, even though there are health risks, even though there are people falling ill left and right. Keep coming out, keep coming to worship. God will protect us. that is not that's not what Jesus did. That's not what Jesus taught. Uh, you don't need to put God to the test. Uh, Trust in God, rely on God, have faith in God. Um, but there's no reason to put yourself into a reckless situation just to prove your faith in God. Oh yeah, having faith in God will sometimes having faith in God will sometimes cause us to enter into dangerous situations. It will sometimes bring danger upon us. But we shouldn't go out seeking reckless and dangerous situations in order to somehow test God's faithfulness in saving us. That's not how it works. And then let's go to another text that I touched on last time, and uh, I really want to kind of get more into today. Matthew chapter 12, uh, starting at verse 1. And here Jesus uses an example. It says, "At that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and to eat them. The Pharisees saw this, and they said to him, 'Look, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on a Sabbath.' But he said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he became hungry, and his companions, how he entered the house of God, and they ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? But I say to you that something greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the innocent.'" Now, the argument here is that, well, you can't accuse Jesus of teaching situational ethics. You can't say that Jesus is saying that it's okay to break the law in certain situations. And on the whole, that is true. But that's not exactly what Jesus' point here is. And I don't think that it's not the term situational ethics has a negative connotation, and with good reasons, because it allows people to change things on a whim. But the point is that Jesus is making here is not that the rules change on a whim. It's that the rules are not so rigid that God doesn't care about what's going on. In other words, Christianity is not a suicide pact. In situations where following the rules, the laws of God to the letter is going to cause unnecessary damage, God is a God of common sense. God understands. I mean, the sorry, I'm a little upset, so I'm tripping over my words trying to get this out. The example that Jesus uses here, David is on the run. He's been on the run from Saul for a good while. Him and his companions were at the point of death. This was the only place that they knew that they could get what they needed. They entered into the house of God. They got the bread. There is no... Yes, that was against the law. That was something that should have come with severe penalty. And yet, God never chastises David for doing that. God never brings punishment against him for doing that, because he understood that the situation was severe, in that if David had just, here's a valid source of food, but it's unlawful, so I'm going to go do something else, that would have resulted in the death of David and his men, and that would have not been preferable to what David did. And David is not the only example that he could have used. You know, Rahab, the harlot. What is she known for? I mean, she's mentioned in as one of the great examples of faith in Hebrews chapter 12. But what was her great example of faith? Well, she lied to the people who are looking for the spies. Isn't lying something that is repeatedly condemned in Scripture? Absolutely. So why is she being praised for it? Because the alternative was disaster. And this is not to condone lying. This is just to say that there are, again, that Christianity, the law of God, in that case, is not a suicide pact. You're not required to follow the rules at any cost. God has enough common sense, enough mercy, enough understanding of our condition that, there are going to be exceptional cases. And we are expected to have enough common sense and enough understanding of God's nature to know that those exceptions exist, and that God is going to, and God is merciful enough to overlook those things and to forgive those things and to use those things to further his goodwill. And again, because those cases are exceptional, I can't make a rule out of that. I can't say that it's okay to lie. I can't say that it's okay to eat the showbread in this example. I can't say that it's okay in general. But I'm not going to say that even if it means you starving to death, you have to. There are, and I know somebody's going to come and say that I'm advocating sinfulness, and that's fine. I can deal with that. The people who would say that, the people who would argue against what I'm saying right now, they don't matter to me. But I'm hoping that we're understanding again, Christianity is not a suicide pact. God is not expecting you to go out and to catch COVID-19 just to prove that you're a faithful Christian. That's not the way it works. So, what is really the motivation here? And I know I'm going a little long, Stevie, so forgive me. I'm closing now. I think that the motivation is, there is fear as a motivator, but it's not fear on the part of people who are staying at home and meeting in small groups in order to worship. See, worship hasn't been canceled. Worship has just been scattered. We're not worshiping. We're still gathering together to worship. We're just gathering in smaller groups. we're still having uh, the mindset of we need to worship God on the first day of the week. We need to get together to worship God on the day of the week. There's just no need for us all to get together in the same room in order to do it. But so what is the fear? The fear is that when this situation is over, when this quarantine is lifted, that certain people aren't going to come back to traditional building worship. That they're going to find their home worship or their virtual worship or whatever so convenient that they're not going to want to return to the status quo. And how do I know that? Because one of these preachers that I'm referring to tipped his hand on, again, on a national, or not a national, so a local TV station on live TV. That was he said that his fear was that people, especially the millennial crowd, will find house worship or virtual worship or whatever so convenient and so nice that they would not come back to the building, and that you're going to lose those people. Well, I don't feel that way. I'm a millennial, and I don't feel that way, and I don't know anybody who did. And that just as a test, I did an informal poll earlier this afternoon to see. I polled the millennial Christians that I know, and let me check the results real quick. Yes, 100% said they would come back to the building when the quarantine was over. Not a single person said that they prefer worshiping in a small group to worshiping as the whole church the way that we've been doing it for years. So I don't think that this fear is something that's founded in rationality. It's as most fears, it's irrational fear that because we've started doing it this way, we're not going to want to return to the way things were, and I don't think that that's something that these preachers really need to be worried about. But to the extent that they are, I hope that my small, informal, unscientific poll at least allays those fears a little bit. So I think I've addressed the majority of the bad argumentation that I've seen. Obviously, I can't hit everything. But please stay safe. Listen to your elders. Again, I'm not saying that it's wrong for you to meet as a large group. If you want to do it, if you have the right to do it, no one's going to stop you except maybe the police or the government or whatever. But if that's what you want, I'm not passing judgment on you. I'm just saying that I don't see it as being the wisest decision, and you shouldn't be passing judgment on the people who are not willing to take that risk, because worship doesn't need us to risk our lives in order to happen, especially when we have alternatives, when we can meet and still gather together. No one's talking about not gathering. No one's talking about splitting up the church. We're talking about gathering in appropriately sized groups in order to worship God in spirit and truth the best way we can, without carrying any additional risk to people who could be seriously injured by this. It's about being wise, being responsible, being reverent, all at the same time. We can do both. Two things we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So the lesson is yours. I hope that allays some of the issues regarding this quarantine and worship in this quarantine. Don't let people guilt you into doing something dangerous. I know. let me be done here. Thanks for listening. Hopefully, it's made an impact on someone who needed to hear it, and continue to tune in to the Gospel Light radio show.